Hello, bastard viewers and people who've never heard of me before. I'm your professionally miserable host Winkers, and today we're talking about something a bit more expansive than just video games. Honestly though, if you've played a video game with a story in the last 10 years, you know exactly what this is about. The same goes for watching movies or television shows or really just consuming any media at all. Little known fact, I'm an author. A self-published author who had very minor success when he was younger, but all the same, I've been writing works of fiction since I was 13. The concept of characterization is what I'm very familiar with, and in today's day and age, we see a lot of people in media doing very badly with this concept. That is to say, we've all wandered into a movie or video game narrative that seems to be more concerned with what a character is than with what a character does. In reality, you can break down every greater issue in modern storytelling to this one fact. Overly woke narrative spoiling the story? It's because they're more concerned with the character's gender identity or race than what they're doing. Novel/game adaptation gone bad? Well, Master Chief is more than just a name. He has deeds and an approach to situations that are just as iconic as his name and appearance. Captain Marvel doesn't work because her struggles are rather small compared to what she's capable of. Godzilla works because, even though it's a simple and stupid premise, it's fun. And there's just as much focus on what the character is doing as there is on what the character is. Interestingly enough, I think Godzilla is the best example to work from on this topic because it's easy to make the mistake of thinking that a Godzilla movie doesn't care about anything but Godzilla being Godzilla. Who's Godzilla, you might ask? A giant lizard monster who destroys cities and then ultimately goes on to destroy other giant monsters. It's very, very simple. In fact, Godzilla is the simplest form of what a character is complementing what a character does. Godzilla is a giant city-destroying monster with tremendous power, so pitting him against the full might and ingenuity of the human race, or another terribly powerful monster, is interesting and enjoyable. That's the thing though, Godzilla does interesting things on top of being an interesting character, even if those things that qualify as interesting are very simple. On the contrary, there's Captain Marvel, who we all already agree is the polar opposite of Godzilla, and who is ultimately one of the strongest heroes shown yet in all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She's a superhero, if you somehow manage to avoid knowing what Marvel is in this day and age. In her movie, she doesn't fight Thanos or a similarly adequate foe. She fights a manipulative collective that's meant to seem controlling and decisive of who she is and can be, which in turn is meant to draw parallels to how she was repeatedly told what girls can and cannot do while growing up. As anyone who's seen the movie can tell you, Captain Marvel's feminism-focused backstory is handled about as well as a sledgehammer in a dental exam. This is because Captain Marvel suffers from very superficial obstacles. All of the threats aren't really a threat to her, and no one she's shown to have a deep emotional connection to is threatened likewise to up the stakes. The villains are shown to have successfully done lots of bad things at certain points in time, but we never really see it happen in a tangible way that affects Captain Marvel. She simply learns they're bad, throws off the shackles she had the power to remove for the entire movie anyway, and then defeats them. No satisfying villain to ultimately overcome, no impactful journey of growth, just her remembering who she is and then immediately being unstoppable. Even a Godzilla movie has the foresight to show Godzilla in some danger when he fights other monsters. Challenges in movies, video games, novels, plays, and whatever else exists with a narrative at its backbone are where tension begins. A character has to struggle through some adversity for a story to be interesting, but more than that, we have to care about them. This is the other half of what a character is versus what a character does. There's no group of media makers who are worse at this than the woke crowd, because they often believe that by giving a character a specific identity, they can virtue signal to shortcut the audience's perceptions of them. The big issue here is that being a certain sexual orientation or a certain race does not exclude you from being a good or bad person, which you, me, and everyone else on the planet is perfectly aware of. In the same vein, having a character say another character is good or bad isn't conclusive enough for the audience either. People must be shown being who they are, and that means both the good and the bad. As an example, better comparable to our failed woke Captain Marvel, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is an endearing character because we see him struggle as a nerd, but he's also spineless. He becomes more confident after he gets his powers, and then for the brilliance of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, the focus shifts because, quite frankly, someone getting superpowers and becoming more confident is boring. What's not boring is someone acquiring incredible power and then realizing that how they use it is suddenly a tremendous responsibility. That's why the line, "with great power comes great responsibility," has so much impact, regardless of the fact that it's his late Uncle Ben who says it. Look back at Captain Marvel and you realize her character didn't have this evolution. She was an amnesiac who slowly remembered who she was and then did what she always did. The character didn't really reflect and grow in a meaningful way, at least not for us to see. The emotional struggles of meeting old friends had no impact because nothing had changed for Carol Danvers. Meanwhile, Peter Parker goes to Thanksgiving in Spider-Man, and the scene has huge emotional impact almost accidentally purely because of all the things that happened prior and of all the changes the various characters were going through. So, we've talked about why a character's actions are more important than their identity. Of course, the opposite can happen too. You do need to know where a character came from to see where they're going, unless that's a deliberate mystery in the plot, of course. It is worth talking about why this happens, though, because it's somewhat insidious and because it's extremely disrespectful in regards to your time and money. The fact of the matter is, the reasons are many, and none of them are good. The ultimate answer, though, can be summarized like this. Someone is making a product, and your entertainment is not their first concern. It's another big strike against the woke crowd because, like many Christian movies, the message they incept is more important than the entertainment value of what you're enjoying. I've been pretty mean to the woke crowd so far, though, and if there's one thing I don't want anyone to think, it's that having woke themes is the reason a piece of media is bad. It's not. Not everyone is going to be interested in a movie with those themes, as with any potential theme, but having those themes is no reason for the media to be poorly received. Having someone with a specific sexual orientation or race being forefront for their character can both not be a detriment and even be leveraged to enhance the story. You have to be something of a realist, though, and understand that a character just being these things adds no inherent value. It also has little to no inherent negatives, though, either, and that any value from any theme comes from what you do to build it. You could remake a lot of successful media, declare one character gay, and then change nothing else and have it be just the same as it was. The thing is, though, that happening isn't particularly realistic. The person who remakes Lord of the Rings and makes Samwise gay is probably also the person who explores the idea of having another of the hobbits along for the journey be gay for the sake of a romantic subplot. And that completely undermines so much of what is already a very complex and rich story by inserting elements that, quite frankly, don't belong. If one of the hobbits was gay and the story was allowed to remain exactly the same, it would be fine. Of course, there's no reason to make a character gay then, but this also explains why inserting identity politics into already established stories is such a difficult thing to do. You have to build around something that's going to have just as much a part in what a character is as what the character does. How would we accomplish this, though? How would we take a woke theme and make it enjoyable for a broader audience? Well, I can't say I'm a fantastic writer because I don't have a lot to back it up. But if I were to take a crack at, say, a story involving a trans superhero that was interesting and compelling to a wider audience, I'd probably do it like this. For starters, I'd look at who our characters are going to be. What they do is most important, but who they are will guide us to that. Our main character is trans, we already know that, but who is our villain? Much of comic books involves taking an ideological opposite and using that as a base for a villain, especially if they're going to be a core villain. The thing is, we don't want this character to be a straw man. We could take a racist bigot and throw them at our trans superstar, but now we've insulted both characters by making their traits have no real depth. A man who has a deep hatred for trans people because they're a bigot is not a man at all, unless you consider a straw man a man. Some people might disagree, but writing a story based on morality and then using preconceptions about people you consider bigoted in the same way bigots use them on others is something the audience can feel, and it ruins what you're doing. A significantly deeper and more nuanced approach would involve a villain who is the way they are for reasons you understand, even if you don't agree with them. Perhaps their child showed interest in being trans, and the villain was initially supportive, until something contemporary to the issue rears its ugly head. I'll put a trigger warning here, because what I say next could be considered cancelable by certain unreasonable individuals, and honestly, I don't want to offend you. The idea would be this person's child had a support group of friends within the LGBT community, but ultimately held other beliefs that they didn't like. We've all seen how far these cliques within certain subcultures can go to isolate a person and make them feel alone and worthless in the world. Especially if you lived through the Tumblr era where this sort of thing was most prevalent. That's when the tragedy strikes for our villain. Their child, driven to suicide by people they originally considered friends, comes to see all of what isn't heteronormative as both an illness of the mind in others and a disease on society as a whole in their grief. It's a significantly deeper character, one that can ultimately be appealed to at times, especially as they grew to do increasingly drastic things to try and force the world to align to their twisted worldview. The idea of them, at the height of their madness, suddenly seeing a potential victim as similar to their own child and having a crisis of faith strikes me as a potentially very engaging scene. Of course, that's one example, and absolutely not the one I would choose. More so though, it is an example of how complex these characters need to be to have more depth than just a bigoted cutout. In reality, that's not the idea I would go with. I would make the villain trans too. The ultimate benefit of this is simple. By having both a protagonist and antagonist mirror one another, we can remove the ability for one to be displayed unfairly. More than that, it creates an ideological struggle for both characters, where each might try to appeal to the other's experiences in a way that better supports their own worldview, and gives us a really definitive reason to display the struggles of a trans person's daily life. Now, when our trans superhero deals with bullies, insensitive people, and the general cruelness of the world, we can weigh it against the similar experiences of the antagonist. It creates a situation where one person takes the high road and understands the enlightened position that you shouldn't judge all people for the actions of a few bad eggs. Inversely, our villain refuses to see this, but for the traumas they've endured, we understand why they're doing what they do and even sympathize with their pain. It's a classical theme that's been done a lot, but classical themes become fresh when they're told in new ways. More importantly, it's ultimately a unifying message on a topic that seems insistent of remaining divisive. People aren't as opposed to one another existing as the world would have you believe. Go ahead, ask your racist uncle. If a trans person weren't bothering anyone, would they have problems with them? Would they want their lives to be worse for them being that way? I think you'll find that even when they throw counter-arguments at you, it's always based on the idea that the person you're defending is actually somehow worse than they are. The very pride of humanity is that, given the choice between letting someone be and giving them grief, the vast majority of us will always choose to leave them be. And that speaks nothing of the average person's capacity for compassion. These are the deeper, iconic themes of conflict in comic book narratives, and leveraging them to your own unique spin on things is essential to a compelling story. Really though, no matter how serious or funny, deliberate or lackadaisical, if there's one thing in a piece of media that's most important, it's your characters. Character conception is important, it's who they are, but character development is what makes an audience love them. From the visuals, to the music, to the choreography and beyond, no matter what is going on, if the characters are good and well liked, everything is better. More than that though, no amount of money spent on those other things will make up for terrible characters, but if you have good enough characters, they can make up for a lack of anything else. Anyway, I'm Winkers of Cardboard Bastards. Thank you for sticking it out to the end of this video. Have a good one.